Hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to EFA147 on this Sunday, August 16th. A little rainy day here behind me, but I'm at the in-laws, about to go back home to Ottawa here in Caledon. Beautiful weekend, beautiful family time. Talk about environment, what you're exposed to in life, you know, and good energy, removing toxins and so forth. And this morning I want to talk about brain food. I was listening to a podcast with James Wicks, who had on his show Dr. Lisa Mosconi, and they were talking about brain food. And those that follow me and know that the lifestyle that I live, and I talk about the food and nutrient-dense food, I've compiled a list, which I've shared with many, of foods that I eat on average. Yesterday I had cake. I had some desserts, some very, very decadent desserts that were brought forth. But I had that within a calorie window in the afternoon, so I decided to have an afternoon window. But within that calorie window, and then there was desserts all the way throughout the weekend and big bowls of everything. And I mean like candy bars and the whole nine yard, right? Like we're not talking about candy bars, I had bars of different types of candies and a really well hosted party. I did not have outside those windows. I had my desserts and treats that within that calorie window, and then my dinner window at night. And that was it. But I did not submerge myself. Why? Because of knowledge, right? Because of knowledge. So I'm going to get into something here, and I'm going to touch on borders. And then when I say borders, I'm talking about the borders between Canada and the U.S. right now, going through custom agents and all that. And I'm going to tie this. I'm going to make you understand a concept that's very, very interesting that came from this podcast that I was listening to, and I tied it into everything that I do. My mother, as I mentioned before, had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Inside the ALS, she also had cancer, bowel cancer got removed. My father had 5 massive strokes before dying. It was 10 days of massive strokes. He beat those strokes. On the last day, sat on his bed, willing to go home, wanting to go home, strong, solid man at 82, but his heart gave up that night. My father-in-law, Alzheimer, that took his life, which actually, my mother, when I said she died of ALS, but it's diabetic shock that killed her, the Kerplunk effect. Well, my father-in-law had the ALS, but he went into a pneumonia state, etc. So there's all these Kerplunk factors that fall into place. My business partner in one of my companies that I have a great business partner with, his father, strong individuals, worked very hard all his life, and then Alzheimer kicks in, right? And then what I found out today, and this is why I do these podcasts, and this is why I like to educate, it's our duty to teach. What I found out today is actually very, very, very interesting, right? And it ties into all the data and all the research. And this is based on data. This is based on research. This is based on brain mapping with the latest in technologies. This is following people through cycles of patterns of life with brain mapping and so forth. So again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, but I do a lot of research, and I like to deep dive into a lot of things, right? And then the connectivity. And those that know my dyslexic mind, and they say that we put things together. And that's why I want to talk to people about it. Just like a border crossing in any country you're at in the world, and you got to go through customs. And there's a reason for that, right? It's to stop a lot of the illegalities. It's to stop a lot of products there's food products in the world that are very dangerous, and they make their way to shelves in good countries. So people for profitability, they'll kill your children just for profitability, right? So let me get into this. One of the key things that came out of that was that brain aging is more diet than destiny. Okay, so brain aging is more of a diet than a destiny. What does that mean? It's your environment, what you're exposed to. And you've heard me talk about epigenetics and the epigenomes, and if you look at the previous podcast and you can research those terminologies, very, very interesting. So when she said that brain aging is more diet than destiny, based on her research and her findings, and how, again, a lot of the doctors out there, a lot of the information on fasting is from those not only knowledge, training, and experience, but they live the lifestyle. And those that live the lifestyle, and they also have the knowledge, training, and experience, and they have the data and they have the research, man, listen to those individuals. you're gonna get very knowledgeable on how to live 100 years disease-free, right? So then talked about the genetic mutation. The genetic mutation accounts for less than 1%. Okay, less than 1%. And if you were to accumulate all the Alzheimer patients, when you look at Alzheimer and the genetic mutation of it, the genetic mutation of Alzheimer accounts for less than 1%. If you were to accumulate Alzheimer patients, family, genetics, etc., that would still account for less than 6%. And what she was talking about was lifestyle and exposure. So meaning that the brain aging is more of a diet than destiny. That data right there with the genetic mutation, people think it's all genetics. It accounts for less than 1%. And also, even if you took all the people, like my wife's family, for example, her father, her uncle, Alzheimer, right? And a lot of that is tied to, she basically says, is your diet and your destiny. So it's not genetics, right? It's your exposure, it's your consumption, and so forth. So then let's go on beyond the lifestyle and exposure. And they talked about the blood-brain barrier. And then in the cannabinoid space, we talked about the blood-brain barrier, and we talked about your receptors and so forth, right? And 60% of the average human being, the average carbon of human being, were made out of water. And the actual average is between 45 to 75%. But if you were to take the average human being, if a child or elderly person is between 45 and 75. But the average human being is 60% water, the whole body consumption. The brain, however, is 80% water. And you've heard me talk about water, and there's a lot of people out there will talk to you about water, but top 4 killers on Earth, not your viruses, number 1 is water, right? The consumption of water is a number 1 killer on Earth because of unclean water and bacteria and so on and so forth. So when you look at that, when you say the body is 60% water and a live brain, they talked about a live brain, and that's the important, that's key here, not a dead brain. A live brain accounts for 80% water, right? So when you look at the blood-brain barrier, the blood-brain barrier, and if you were going to break it down, that's your customs. That's your customs. And in each one of those customs officer, in each one of those drive-through that you go through at custom, the borders, right? Those gates, whatever you're going through, whatever custom you're going through in the world, and the reason why those custom officers are there, those custom officers are the messengers, right? And the borders are the gates that are part of the blood-brain barrier. Same thing in your country. The reason why you have customs is to control what's coming into your country, what's going out of your country, whether it's food, whether it's medication, whether it's illegalities, and so on and so forth, right? So, and those customs officers are the messengers to that country. Same thing what I'm talking about here. So if you're going to look at it that way, when you look at your blood-brain barrier, and you're looking at the gates they talk about in the blood-brain barrier, and the dilution of what the blood-brain barrier allows into the brain, because it controls all the nutrients, it controls what goes into the brain, and 75% of it is lost before it enters the brain. Right, so I'm going to explain that in a moment. So basically, they dissect 75% of it. You can't bring that in, but you can bring this in to the country, right? Only this 25% goes in. That's what the blood-brain barrier does for the brain. So let me break this down here. I talked about ambient water, and I've always said this: ambient water, like a warm water, is better absorbed. Every lifestyle, every medical book, everything that I've ever done in diet-wise or looked at or data-wise, etc., it's always ambient water. Drink your ambient water, drink your warm water. That's better absorption, because cold water is a barrier, right, for absorption compared to ambient warm water. So they're all key things when living. 80% is water and 60% is water, right? Think about that for a second. You want to make sure what you're consuming on a day-to-day basis, incrementation. Remember lifestyle and environment and what you're subjected to, and epigenetics and epigenomics, what you do every day, all the time. It's not that piece of cake and candy and treat that I had yesterday inside my calorie window that's going to do it. It's what I do every day, which is not eating a piece of cake and a piece of candy inside of a calorie window, right? So your brain is built on particular food. That was interesting, because that's what that 100%, the blood-brain barrier, your customs officer, they stopped 75% of that. They only allowed 25% of it. And that 25% is what builds your brain, right? And your brain is built on particular food. It's built on nutrient-dense food. So all those empty calories that we talked about that you consume all the time, they're not good. They're not good for your blood brain, right? And they're not good. They won't allow it to come in. And that's why you're starving your brain of nutrients and so forth. And it gets interesting in Alzheimer, dementia, and the nutrients and what you're consuming that the blood-brain barrier won't allow in, and what is left is not good. And that's why the diseases of the brain and so on and so forth, right? So those nutrient-dense diet, stay away from the artificial and the high refined sugars and all the unnatural foods and all the processed foods out there. That's what's happening. That's not coming into the brain. So the brain is starving of nutrients, right? So nutrient-dense food. It talks about how the blood barrier is basically a shield, how it's a protector, customs officer, right? Your border crossings, etc. And only allowing specific products, nutrients, to be passed through, right? That's exactly what it is. It's a custom, and what goes to the brain, right? So homeostasis in the brain. It talked about the brain being the equilibrium. Okay, so I want you to think about that for a second, which is the for optimizing the health, for optimizing your health, your lifestyle and your consumption is key, right? And it talks about the optimization of your health and being part of the equilibrium. If that brain is not functioning at 100%, and all these other key things that ties to your body, right? Remember the environment and the stress and the consumption and the top 4 things: water, environment, right? Pollution, and being struck by it. Those are the things that kill you on earth the most. So those 3 things, the water, the environment, and the pollutions and the subjected to, all that stuff, you can control that. You can control that. And you can control the food that goes into your body, the nutrient-dense food to your body, to give your brain. So imagine living 70, 80, 90, 100 years disease-free and a really good brain, a really good processing center, right? Your equilibrium for your body. Think about those key words here, right? Equilibrium for your equilibrium for your body, which is optimizing your health and wellness, and etc. and so forth. And so I just want to close this off here. On the brain food she mentioned. She mentioned I've compiled a list of all the brain food, body food that I eat, that Jean-Guy has put together, and the tweaking that I've done the last 14 months, and I add and I tweak, and people ask me, what kind of lifestyle do you live? A paleo lifestyle, a keto lifestyle, a intermittent fasting lifestyle, I live all those lifestyles. I said that before: intermittent fasting lifestyle, OMAD lifestyle, ketosis lifestyle, like anything that has to do with autophagy and so on and so forth. And I also eat the foods that I eat 99.9% of the time, the 98% of the time, that kind of stuff. Those foods, I've compiled a list of it, and it's all food that relates to that lifestyle, that relates to ketosis, that relates to autophagy, that relates to everything healthy for the brain and the body and the soul. Right? Like right behind me, the rain, that Zen feeling, listen. Isn't that peaceful? Right? You feel it, right? When you're by a lake and you're inside this environment, right now I could hear family inside, but the rain overtakes it. The power of nature, the power of being by a lake, you feel it in your body and soul. The same thing happens when you feed your body and soul that way, right? So it talks about the ketosis, and I mentioned this before, but she mentions caviar and fish eggs. She mentions salmon, almond, extra virgin olive oil, flax seeds. Those are key things that all fit into the lifestyle foods that I eat and are part of my list. So everything I look at, when somebody mentions food, I keep adding food to my list that, from research commonality, it fits in all these criteria, it fits in all these boxes, and they're all healthy, nutritious, and nutrient dense and so forth. They're real calories. All those foods, I'm constantly adding and tweaking my list of foods that I could have. The menu is ginormous. You can drop me off anywhere in the world, and I will eat. I don't have to measure. I don't have to calculate. Drop me off anywhere in the world, and I have a very wide list of food that I can eat. A very wide food list that I can eat, that I can just choose from and still live an OMAD lifestyle, and still live an intermittent fasting lifestyle, and still meet the autophagy, and still meet all the criteria that I need. So in closing, that's it. Okay, it's important for me to teach, right? And I like to be taught. And today, like EFA147 is about brain food. And it's about brain food, but it also ties into the lifestyle that I live. And those that I know that have lost their parents to diseases, that that the big bulk of it is lifestyle through consumption and environment. Just like the rain behind me, right? You can bring it back. You can bring it back. You can feel it. You can feel it, right? That when you live this way, and it's our duty to teach. Jean-Guy EFA147.